To Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai, double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Salutations throughout the four corners of the earth. Salutations to you brothers throughout the four corners of the earth, teaching the truth in righteousness and sincerity. To you Israelite foreigners, come back home to the truth. To those that passed away serving the Lord, the dead in Yahweh Shai shall arise first. All right, I want to do this video. It's just another historical slashing on those that believe that the so-called Hispanics and Native Americans are not descendants of the children of Israel. There's a book, it's by Jan Rogozinski, called A Brief History of the Caribbean. All right, I'm going to start off in the preface, right, going into how Cuba and Jamaica grew sugarcane. Jamaica and Cuba both became major producers of sugarcane grown by black slaves. However, Jamaica developed into a plantation society in the 18th century and Cuba during the 19th. Now that's not a major fact, but it goes to show, how there was slavery and how, how it came to be. In America, in the Americas, you had, or rather in so-called United States of America, you had cotton. In the Caribbean, you had sugarcane. Right, so going, reading on in the book where America interfered with the Caribbean, from the 1880s, American capital had a major role in developing the sugar industry in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic. The United States remained the region's largest trading partner, except for Cuba, which trades mainly with the Soviet Union. For humanitarian reasons, look at what the fucking white man says is the reason why they interfered with the Caribbean. It says, for humanitarian reasons and to prevent interference by one of the warring European states, President Woodrow Wilson purchased the Danish Virgin Islands in 1917. He also sent American troops to occupy the Dominican Republic from 1916 to 1924 and Haiti from 1915 to 1934. In addition, the United States also intervened in Cuba on several occasions between 1906 and 1934. These American efforts failed in their avowed purpose to establish honest, stable, and democratic governments. Well, the problem is democracy is not honest, especially not the way you practice it. All right, so it says, thus the United States generally has taken a hands-off approach since the 1930s. However, it did send troops to intervene during civil wars in the Dominican Republic in 1965 and Grenada in 1983. Except in Haiti and Cuba, every island regularly holds elections. Winner takes office and the loser retires. Test of democracy not met in most of the world. All right, now reading on, page 18, same book. Until Europeans and Africans arrived, a host of illnesses, including smallpox, measles, typhus, yellow fever, malaria, tuberculosis, and pus infections, were totally unknown in the Americas. So we didn't even have these diseases. Not saying we didn't have diseases, we didn't have these diseases. Right? So it says, some of these diseases were based in Africa, so, I can understand, I know that in this case, the white man's not trying to criminalize Africans. He's pretty much criminalizing both Europeans and Africans. Africans coming to the Caribbean fared better than European colonists. So it goes to show how so-called black people that came to the Caribbean fared better than European colonists. So obviously, you can't say that the Hispanics are white because, they were already there. And the white people that came over there didn't fare so well. Most islands were decidedly unhealthy for whites, who today form only a small minority, 5% or less of their population. So at best, you might have 5% of the population of any given Caribbean island that is actually of Caucasian descent. Right? Moving on with the so-called white man's involvement in the Caribbean. It says here, let's see. Oh, here we go. This is on the island of Hispaniola. He imposed that he is Nicolas de Ovando of Spain. He imposed strict discipline upon the settlers and treated the natives with great harshness. Spanish troops now conquered the rest of the island, treacherously murdering the chiefs, caciques, of the western regions at a banquet. So the so-called white man came in, just fucking killed everything. Western Cuba was conquered by Panfilo de Narvaez and other Spaniards from Jamaica, whose march through the island was marked by unprovoked massacres of Indians. So Indians, that's who was, and it says in this book that it was the Siboney Indians. Right? So page 35. I'm moving right on. For more than 2 centuries, Spanish rulers claimed that all of the Americas were their property because Columbus had sailed under the authority of Queen Isabella. Francis I of France reportedly asked where in Adam's will did the first man leave the Indies exclusively to the Spanish king. But the Dutch, British, and French did not begin to plant colonies in Spain's island world until about 1625. So that means that Spain had a monopoly in the Caribbean from 1492 to 1625. That's over roughly 130 years. Seizing territory involved expensive problems of governance and defense. Spain's enemies preferred to weaken the Spanish economy and kingdom by licensing or ignoring pirates and privateers who seized Spanish ships on the high seas. We're going to get more into this. This is what the origin of the Pirates of the Caribbean is, by the way. Let's see. The Spanish crown focused its attention on Europe, and it depended on the Americas primarily as a source of treasure to support its European wars. So the reason why Spain was so much in power was because they were robbing the so-called Hispanic Indians here in the Americas. They called us Hispanic afterwards, but the so-called Indians of the Caribbean, which turned out to later on become a mixture of the tribe of Dan, but primarily because the tribe of Dan was scattered among the 10 tribes, and also in Europe. But you had primarily Ephraim, Manasseh, and Simeon here in this hemisphere. All right, so let's see. Yeah, I'm only bringing up Dan because motherfuckers are gonna be simple. We're not ignorant of the history. All right, so page 36, reading on. By the way, just to recap, it's A Brief History of the Caribbean by Jan Rogozinski. Thus, the mines in Santo Domingo, Cuba, and Puerto Rico largely were played out by the end of the 1520s. So they had already robbed everything they wanted in 30 years. Damn, I had one viewer and then they left. Wow. Thus, the government of Philip II could pledge the treasury as security in borrowing from German and Genoese bankers. The German and Genoese bankers were actually the forefathers of the Illuminati. Remember, they were in Germany. During the last third of the 16th century, these loans allowed the Spanish crown to assemble the Great Armada that invaded England in 1588, send mercenary soldiers to crush the rebellion in the Netherlands, and subsidize the Catholic forces in France. Clearly, they used us as collateral. All right, so going further, it says the French, who were almost continuously at war with Spain until 1559, were the first to attack Spain's Caribbean ports. So the French was the first ones to attack Spain in the Caribbean. Spain in the Caribbean. Right? As early as 1522 and 1523, naval squadrons belonging to Jean Dango of the Dieppe in Normandy managed to seize 4 ships carrying back to Spain Montezuma's fabled treasures and other riches seized by Cortez in conquering Mexico. Because the Caribbean was a middle ground between Spain and South America and Central America. By the mid-1500s, as many as 30 French ships raided the Indies each year, virtually controlling the seas and repeatedly pillaging coastal towns of Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. So the French were constantly raiding here. You know, this is also the origins of the pirates in the Caribbean, as we're going to go into a little later. All right, in page 52, from the 1560s, however, Havana became the most important settlement in the Caribbean because of its vital importance in protecting the treasure fleets carrying America's silver to Spain. Havana effectively became the capital of Cuba under Hernando de Soto, who used the island as a base to support his invasion of Florida in 1537. Now this is heavy history, because this is part of the reason why there's so many Cubans in Florida, is because a lot of, not only is it close as hell, but it's also, you know, the Cuba set up the invasion by Spain of Florida. Mind you, Britain hadn't landed here yet. All right. Now, going into a couple other things. I already read one thing about how so-called white people was not built for this, for these islands. I'm gonna read just a little bit more on that. Page 37. For more than 150 years, until the final collapse of Spanish power in the 1670s and 1680s, Spanish ships and ports provided the main prey in the Caribbean. So in the Caribbean, Spanish ships were the main ones getting fucking raided. They were the main targets. That's another word for prey, targets. They were targets. They were being targeted. All right, page 73, that's the spirit. I flip right to the page. All right, it says, it was the combination of sugar and tropical diseases that made the Caribbean islands into the colonies populated almost entirely by African slaves. Indentured servants stopped coming during the 1660s because the islands became deadly for whites. So this is very important, because most of the Caribbean islands, you know, you got 3 major Hispanic islands, and even one of those Hispanic islands is halfway ran by so-called black people. And then you also have a lot of so-called Cubans are really from the Southern Kingdom, African slaves brought over. And Puerto Rico too. A good portion of Puerto Rico is really so-called, you know, Southern Kingdom, or they could really be Southern Kingdom, Northern Kingdom that was scattered among the Southern Kingdom. You know what I'm saying? Because that's how, you know, that's how slavery worked. People were separated from their fucking families. You know, I'm gonna touch briefly on Columbus. In the event that he succeeded, the crown would grant Columbus hereditary nobility and the title of admiral, make him viceroy of the mainlands and the islands he reached, and give him 1/10 of the profits taken from them. The privileges granted to Columbus were unusually generous, but the capitulation itself was a traditional device through which the crown delegated specific royal powers to the leader of an expedition. All right, so basically Columbus came off from what he did, and could have came off even more. Now I'm going to read about, this is some important history. Matter of fact, important history going into the origins of the people of the Caribbean. All right, because it's very important to understand how the so-called Hispanics ended up in the Americas. You know, it's incredibly important. Primarily because you got motherfuckers out there, you know, that are teaching lies about the origin of the so-called Hispanic tribes. All right, wait, Shalak. Nope, this ain't it. Clearly I'm getting old. Yep, clearly I am getting old. There we go, perfect. Alright. So this is very important history. Matter of fact, I'm going to read the scripture first, then I'm going to read the history. Alright, so it says, 2nd Ezra 13 verse 40. Those are the 10 tribes. Who were the 10 tribes? Hold up, 1 second. Crazy. Simeon, Zebulun, Ephraim, Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, Asher, Naphtali, Issachar. That's 9 tribes, and Dan. All right, because Dan is part of the northern kingdom. They came over here. We just don't know exactly who they are today. But it says, let's see. Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoner out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, whom Salmanassar the king of Assyria led away captive. Now this is important that it mentions Salmanassar, because now you know this is around 722 BC. All right, it says, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land, because they took us into another land. So we weren't in Israel no more, in the northern kingdom. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt. Now, a lot of people mistakenly associate this and think that all, like literally the whole 10 tribes came here all together. That's false. The truth of the matter is they came here in spurts. A lot of them didn't even come here. A lot of them settled in Europe. You had the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, Tyre and Sidon at this time. They were being populated by Israelites from the northern kingdom. But a lot of them came over here to the Americas. So it says, and by the way, it says a further country where never mankind dwelt. Now what makes that important is, at this point, we're around 722 BC. Where has mankind never dwelt? Either you're going to say, because Europe had already been populated by the Japhites, which were shortly about to be taken over by Israelites and Edomites at this point in history. Asia clearly was Moab and Ammon and Elam. Elam and Ham in Israel was in the Middle East. Esau was in the Middle East too at this point. Yeah, they were in the Middle East still at this point. And Africa was ran by Ham. So what does that leave? That leaves Australia was already in the hands of the hey, Shalom. Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shah Barakatah. Khan, Shalom, brother. Or family, I didn't see the name. Salat. But yeah, man, Israel, the only 2 places that Israel could have went to was Antarctica and the Americas. And judging by how we were a people that were coming from the Middle East where it's warm, 9 times out of 10 we would come to the Americas. It says that they might there keep their statutes which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow passages of the places of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them and held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half, and the same region is called Arsareth, which means faraway land. Now, it's very important to get an understanding. Now, I don't have a map handy right now, but when you look at a map, right, they went in through the Middle East, they went around Africa. Now, if they're going around Africa, clearly that means they're going southward, and they went westward to the Americas. Where they landed at was likely, if you use common sense and geography, likely in the southern tip of South America, and then they worked their way upwards, which, when you link it up with the history, is very important that you know, like I said, you link it up with the history. It says right here, in contrast to the Siboney, that's the so-called Cuban Indians, by the way. I'm likely a descendant of the Siboney Indians. I'm so-called Cuban. The Arawak and the Carib carried more advanced ways of life with them from the original homeland from their original homeland in the Amazon basin. So the Arawaks and the Arawaks and the Carib Indians and the Siboney Indians originally came from the Amazon basin, which, what does that mean? They came from Central or South America in Brazil. We were all together at one point. Right? So it says, honestly, it doesn't go into much right after that. Let me see what it says in page 17. Oh, here's very important, because they said that the Native Americans were cannibals, right? Because the Carib fought attempts to enslave them, the Spanish described them as bloodthirsty savages. Indeed, the English term cannibal is derived from their Spanish name Carabal, but human meat had no place in their regular diet. Cannibalism was practiced as part of a religious rite in which their captors tortured, killed, and ate their bravest warriors in one battle. So the real fucking cannibals was the white man. So don't get that shit twisted. The fucking white man, the Spaniards were the real fucking cannibals. Alright, but I just wanted to go into that. I also want to go a little further. I did say that I was going to go into the Pirates of the Caribbean. The Pirates of the Caribbean came from Europe originally. And I'm going to go into it. On the mainland, Spanish adventurers finally found the untold riches in gold and especially in silver that the islands could never provide. When it says the mainland, it's talking about the Americas. Not the islands, but the actual the land that was, all together basically. Henceforth, the island were only important because Spanish treasure fleets had to pass them on their way to Seville. So remember what I said earlier, the Spanish, the so-called Caribbean islands were important because they were a middle point between Europe and Mexico and Peru, where they found all this gold at and silver. Piracy became an accepted business in many French and British ports. Shalom, Shamaiwan, Simeon. Nice. So it says, with the Dutch joining them after 1599. Right, so this is your history, brother. Just going into it. Thousands of pirate ships attacked Spanish shipping and ports in the Caribbean along the coast of Central America. So the pirates, remember, they were British, French, and Dutch. Because this is important. When you watch the movie, you can pretty much tell that these people were British, French, and Dutch by the history. To protect its fleets from pirates, Madrid, which is the capital of Spain, imposed a system of economic regulation that endured until the 1750s. All right, so that's just one little bit of information going into the origin of the Pirates of the Caribbean. Basically, what happened was, to sum it up, and I'm going to go into it with this book, but Spain had such a monopoly on the goods in the Americas that Britain and France and Netherlands, which is the Dutch, they was basically hating. And these were Jakes, by the way. At this time, these countries were still ruled by Jakes. So the Pirates of the Caribbean were so-called black people. So-called. All right, moving over to page 59. Let's see. Pirate ships sailing from any of the Atlantic ports were manned by crews of mixed nationality. Norman, French, British, Dutch, and even Scandinavian. Now the Scandinavian, that's important because these were descendants of the Vikings. All right. The Vikings pretty much mostly came out of Scandinavia. All right. So let's see. A little further going into the Pirates of the Caribbean, page 92. For the next 50 years, hungry, adventurous, or criminal men from the established colonies in the Lesser Antilles constantly replenished the pirate bands. So after a while, the pirates were from the Caribbean. The original pirates were Israelites from France, England, and Netherlands. Then they were replenished from within the Caribbean. So this is basically kind of like a maroon camp, but on the outlaw side. You know what I mean? Even though maroon camps was outlawed. failed planters, disgruntled former servants, runaway black slaves, petty criminals, and religious and political malcontents all drifted north and west to the thinly populated islands of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and Jamaica. So at this point, a lot of the pirates became native Caribbean people, which, you know, slavery a lot like this is, you know, also so-called blacks. So it goes to show that so-called blacks and the Hispanics, we teamed up together because we was always a good mix together. We was always good together. So it goes to show, it goes to destroy that whole thing with Hispanics not being of Israelite origin. Because you got this guy that did a diss track dissing Yohana and, you know, different brothers, including Apostle Tahar. But he also teaches, you know, when you speak to him, that the Hispanics are not Israelites. He calls us heathens, you know. So that's why it's important to bring out the history. Page 130. Moreover, many additional slaves died on the way to the ships before leaving Africa. No precise accounting is possible, but as many as 8 million Africans may have died to bring 4 million slaves to the Caribbean islands. That's 2/3 of the so-called African people that were put on ships to come to the Caribbean. 2/3 of them died. They meant for 12 million to come, only felt 4 million came. Right? That goes to show the white man's the fucking devil, man. They will kill 2 to bring 1 into slavery. All right. Page 140. On all the sugar islands, death rates for blacks were always higher than the birth rates. Africans sold to Caribbean cane estates, cane meaning sugar, suffered a much harsher fate than those carried farther north to America. So black slaves, so-called black slaves, were dying in the Caribbean at a harsher rate than in America, in the United States. You know, because the so-called white man was treating the so-called Benjamin, Levi, because remember the Caribbean houses 5 tribes, 6 if you count Dan, but they're mixed among all of them. But as far as main tribes that are, you know, that have their own land, you have Ephraim, Manasseh, Simeon. I'm Manasseh. The brother listening, the brother that's tuned in right now is Simeon. You have Manasseh, Ephraim, Simeon, Benjamin, and Levi. 5 tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel, right? That were in the Caribbean. So that's why this book is very important, to bring out the history. Right now, page 156. Now, one thing I also want to go into is that this book doesn't mention anything really about Israel as a whole, as a nation. Because when you read history, you have to put 2 and 2 together, right? I just read in the scriptures that the children of Israel came to a land where never mankind dwelt. Salak. Hey, Shalom. Yahweh Hashem Yahweh Shah Barakatah. The brother from Lynn, Massachusetts, Boston. Shalom, huh? Shalom. I'm just going into the history, brother. I'm going into this book, A Brief History of the Caribbean. All right, but so reading it up here, it says runaway slaves formed bands on Cuba and Puerto Rico almost as soon as the Spanish imported Africans to replace the exterminated Arawak. During the 16th century, these Maroons joined in pirate and buccaneer attacks on Cuban cities. Come on, man. These Maroons, the Maroon camps were in the Caribbean. So you could see similar. Now, the Maroon camps in the Caribbean and the Maroon camps in South and Central America, they didn't know each other. So how did they do the same exact thing? Band together the natives of this land with slaves that were coming from Africa that spoke Hebrew. How come they banded together against the European? That goes to show, man, we were both against the European. So just on that alone, if you can't see that the so-called Hispanics and Native Americans together are Israel, then I don't know what to tell you. Right? Now, Israel fights back. Let me read a little further. This is going into Toussaint Louverture. You know, you so-called Haitian brothers And a lot of you so-called Dominican brothers, you know this name very well. A Creole slave from the North Province, born Francois Dominique Toussaint, he adopted the name Louverture, which means the opening, and organized a small band of loyal black followers. With the outbreak of war, he entered the Spanish service, so he fought alongside the Spanish, and built up a force of some 4,000 black troops skilled in guerrilla warfare. Right? It says on May 6th, 1794, Toussaint suddenly turned on the Spanish in Saint Raphael and slaughtered many as they came out of the church after Mass. This isn't Dominicans that he killed fucking white people. So it says, an untrained but brilliant general, Toussaint effectively used both guerrilla tactics and frontal attacks against the British. So he was fighting France, Spain, and Britain. That was a bad brother right there, man. That was a bad brother, Toussaint Louverture. Moreover, Toussaint's victories inspired renewed attacks by André Rigaud, who commanded a force of several thousand colored and black troops in the south. See, a lot of people don't know that Toussaint Louverture wasn't by himself. You had other so-called leaders in the island of Hispaniola that were fighting against the French, but he was the main one. Right? So it says, English forces had been driven back to 4 ports. Shalom, sis. English forces had been driven back to 4 ports along the coast by June 1795, and the Spanish had retired to Santo Domingo. The British sent another army under a new general, but Toussaint retained control of the north and the west. This is very important for you to understand Haitian, so-called Haitian Levite history. Right? It says, the British sent another army under a new general, but Toussaint remained in control of the north and the west. So north and west Hispaniola belonged to Toussaint Louverture, while André Rigaud, kept the initiative in the south. All right. So that was it on that. Now, I'm gonna go to something that's actually near and dear to me because I'm a so-called Cuban. You know, because the book is, again, just to recap, a brief history of the Caribbean. All right, it goes into the history of different islands in the Caribbean, and it goes to show and right now I'm about to read about the so-called Cubans. Shalom, sis. All right, so let's see. It says, Che Guevara's forces moved into Havana on the night of January 1st. This is, I believe, I forgot what year Castro took over Cuba, but it was that year. But Fidel Castro deliberately held off and entered the city a week later. Salat, theatrically riding in on a tank. In marathon of speeches to a crowd of more than 1 million, Castro chastised the people of Havana for not having joined his revolution earlier. When Castro arrived in Havana, the Cuban living standard was equal to that in many European nations. So in Cuba, the white Cuba, because when Castro took over, Cuba was ran by white so-called Cubans, Spaniards, right? So, and they were oppressing the shit out of the native, so-called Cubans, which was my ancestors, and the so-called black Cubans, which was likely from Judo or probably some Manessa that was scattered in West Africa. Within Latin America, Cubans ranked second in per capita income and third in food consumption. At least 80% were literate, and a relatively high number owned radios and television sets. In proportion to its population, the island had more doctors and dentists than France, the Netherlands, and Great Britain. All right, so let's see. Let me see. There's a lot here that's worth reading, but I'm gonna stick with the main stuff. However, Castro turned down the U.S. government's offers of financial assistance. That's in page 236. So he didn't want the white man in America's help. See, even among white people, because Castro is not a native Cuban. Castro, his father came from Spain to Cuba. So he's likely an Edomite. If you want to say he's a possible Israelite foreigner, it's possible. But that remains to be seen. But reading on page 238, on April 15th, exile pilots flying B-26 bombers attacked Cuban air bases to knock out Castro's small air force. When bombs hit the CIA command ship, the rest of the fleet fled, leaving almost 1,500 men stranded. After 2 days of fighting, Castro's army took 1,189 prisoners. The CIA officials began making plans to assassinate Castro. The CIA, working for the American government, had plans to assassinate Castro. In 1960, when they recruited mafia chiefs who had lost their casinos in Cuba. See, Castro he confiscated the casinos that was ran by the mafia in Cuba. So that's why when you watch the movie JFK, the mafia was involved in a lot of the accusations and the situations leading to the assassination of JFK. They were heavily involved in that. Following the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion, President John F. Kennedy was determined to bring down the Castro regime. He devoted more than $100 million to Operation Mongoose, headed by his brother Robert Kennedy. The agency sought to murder Castro and to destroy the Cuban economy. So the white man wanted to kill Castro and fuck up the Cuban economy. They said, fuck that. These spics, cause now the Cuba was going into communism, which means that the white Cubans was getting oppressed just as bad as the Hispanic, the Siboney Indian descendants, and the Judites that came over in slavery. To discredit Castro, one agent suggested staging the second coming of Christ, but this project was rejected as too expensive. Goes to show the white man is the devil the Bible speaks of. You can't trust his ass. Alright, so moving on. Through rationing residence permits and worker identification cards, the government controlled where and how every Cuban lived. The Committee for the Defense of the Revolution, created in September 1960, ensured that no Cuban could escape Castro's revolution. To mold the minds of Cuba's inhabitants, it was essential to control all means of communication and popular culture. Now, mind you, I told y'all that I'm from Cuba, you know, and my father vouched for a lot of this because he was alive during all of this. You know, I was born in 1979, so I came to this country in 1980. So it says, with the exception of some Soviet publications, foreign newspapers and journalists were outlawed. Fidel Castro had no artistic interests and he disliked intellectuals. He thus turned cultural endeavors over to veteran communists. Communist bureaucrats directed state-run organizations, including a film institute, writers' union, and the National Council of Culture. Right, I'm almost done, by the way. Those of y'all that's getting bored, you know what I'm saying? I'm almost done, and I'm gonna post this video. You know what I mean? But it's very important that we understand and know our history. You know, even if you're not from the Caribbean islands, it's very important that you know this history. Now, right here, I'm about to read something that's very near and dear to me, because this is literally how I came to this country in 1980. It says, it's a section of the book called the Mariel Boat Lift. Castro's foreign victories could not conceal Cuba's continuing economic depression. World sugar prices fell because the Caribbean was primarily, a lot of the crops was tobacco and sugar. But when sugar was falling off, because that's why the white man has all types of fake shit, stevia and high fructose corn syrup. These all take the places of sugar. While industrial production remained dismal, in all of 1980, Cuba produced only 25,000 refrigerators for its 10 million inhabitants. 25,000 refrigerators for 10 million people. That's crazy. When it arrived, the monthly food ration provided only 5 pounds of rice, 3.5 pounds of meat, and 4 ounces of coffee. Men received 2 pairs of trousers, 1 shirt, and 1 pair of shoes each year, all of abysmal quality. So it was bad quality shit they was given. To maintain order, Castro intensified political and religious repression during the 1970s. Amnesty International counted at least 20,000 political prisoners held in extraordinarily harsh conditions. After the Havana-Miami airlift ended in 1973, it became a crime to leave Cuba. So he wanted us to fucking stay in the damn oppression. It became a crime to leave Cuba. In March of 1980, mind you, I'm living here in Havana at the time. March, I was about 6 months old. Six months old. 6 men crashed a stolen bus through the gates of the Peruvian embassy. Castro suddenly pulled all guards from around the embassy compounds. Before Cuban police returned 48 hours later, almost 11,000 men, women, and children had taken refuge inside the embassy grounds. Now, this is very important also because if you like the movie Scarface, this is some backstory, because literally the same way I came to this country is the same way the fictional character Scarface came to this country. So if you watch that movie, it's history that explains what happened in the movie. They remained there for more than a month under appalling conditions without food, water, or toilets. Exile leaders in Miami pressured the United States to act. So there were people that had left Cuba that were not allowed to come back, that were pressuring America to do something. On April 20, Castro announced that any Cuban could leave by boat from the port of Mariel, some 20 miles west of Havana. Within a week, exiles from in the United States had sailed some 500 boats, and hundreds more soon followed. On May 14th, President Carter ordered the U.S. Coast Guard to stop the boat flotilla. The U.S. naval blockade failed, and approximately 125,000 refugees reached Key West before Castro stopped immigration in September. Now, this is important because, like I said, because I'm from Cuba and I came to America during this time, I could vouch for it. My father said we landed in America on May 13th, the day before President Carter told them to stop letting them in. Right? So it said Castro used the Mariel boat lift to get rid of physically and mentally disabled persons. However, now this is very important because when you watch the movie Scarface, they made it look like it was mostly criminals and faggots that was here in America, or that was sent here, right? So it says, however, American news media exaggerated the number of criminals among the Mariel refugees. Thousands of refugees had been jailed in Cuba, but their crimes included homosexuality, which is a real crime, by the way, and membership in religious groups such as the Jehovah's Witness and the Seventh-day Adventists. Some had been political prisoners, such as the poets Reynaldo Arenas and Roberto Valero. Fewer than 350. Oh, nice. Well, I don't know what year, but that's the day I came to this country, in 1980. I was 7 months old. It says, fewer than 350 of the 125,000 refugees had committed serious crimes under the U.S. laws. So it goes to show you that in the movie Scarface, the white man's lying again about the type of people that came over here. Now, a lot of this book, I don't want to... He hath put forth his hands against such as be at peace with him. He hath broken his covenant. That's the so-called white man for you, man. Now, there's a lot more on this book on Cuba, but I don't want to hog it up just because I'm from so-called Cuba. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of information. I want to bring out a little something about Ephraim. Now, you remember how important Ephraim is when, let's see. Let's go into Ephraim here real quick. I want to go to Genesis, the 49th chapter, where it talks about Ephraim. Because this is a very important thing. Genesis 49:22, it's really primarily talking about Ephraim being the so-called, the sons of Joseph. It says, let's see. Wait, hold up. All right, it says, Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well whose branches run over the wall. The archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him, but his bow abide in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty power of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Even by the God of thy father, who shall help thee, and by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breast and of the womb. Alright, so main thing that I wanted to go to is that whose branches run over the wall. Now it says Puerto Ricans on the mainland. The mainland is literally North Canada, United States, Mexico, like the lands that are all together, not the islands. It says, over the years, the Puerto Rican population has become more dispersed. 2 out of 3 Puerto Ricans settled in New York in 1960. So that means 2/3 of all Puerto Ricans in the world were in New York in 1960. By 1990, only 1/3 lived there. Puerto Ricans were scattered from Canada, from California to Connecticut, from Florida to Massachusetts. No longer concentrated in homogeneous ghettos, many have assimilated into their local communities and have been elected to local and state office. I mean, that speaks for itself. You know? Let's see. There's one more thing that I want to bring out here. Page 295. Not a big deal. And although this book is primarily concentrated on the Caribbean, I want to give Asher a little bit of shine here because it says something that you can relate back to the scriptures. Although it doesn't say Hebrew here or Asher, it's talking about a country, and it talks about something that the scriptures foretold that Asher would have in the scriptures. It says, in 1916, a subsidiary of the Royal Dutch Shell Group built an enormous refinery in Curacao that processed oil from Venezuela and later from Colombia, which is Asher. Standard Oil of New Jersey, aka Exxon, built a second large refinery in Aruba in 1929. Now, reason why I wanted to bring that out, Deuteronomy 33:24, and of Asher he said, let Asher be blessed with children, let him be acceptable to his brethren, and let him dip his foot in oil. Why would it say that let him dip his foot in oil? Because in Venezuela and Colombia, you have a lot of oil. I believe Chevron is actually a Venezuelan company. That was Chavez. That's how Chavez had a lot of countries by the balls, because he was the president of a country that had a lot of oil. All right. So with that, unless the people that's watching have any questions, you know what I'm saying, I'm gonna give y'all a couple, you know, to throw out the questions. But you know, again, this is a very good book, A Brief History of the Caribbean by Jan Rogozinski. All right, goes into history of the Caribbean islands. It doesn't outright prove that the so-called Hispanics are Israel, but it gives a lot of history, and a lot of that history is relatable to the scriptures, going into what, you know, how Benjamin, Levi, you know, we was all Kun. That's why I'm bringing it out through the Spirit. You know, it does have to come out, you know, because a lot of so-called Hispanics, a lot of Benjamites, a lot of Levites, Haitians, and West Indians don't know their history. They don't know that they're the greatest people in history. You know what I mean? And you know, so if there's no further questions, you know, I want to end it off by saying all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone. Salutations to you, brothers throughout the four corners of the earth, teaching the truth in righteousness and sincerity. And to you sisters holding it down. To you brothers, to those that passed away serving the Lord, the dead in Yahweh Shai shall arise first. Shalom. Y'all be safe.